The Jeopardy Greatest of All Time tournament wrapped up last night in dramatic fashion. Game 4 of this potentially 7-game series was the clinching game. 13 million people watched last night. That's down just a tick from the 15 million that watched Game 3 last week, but still the highest rated program of the night and a huge ratings win for ABC, which lately has invested heavily in game shows. Celebrity Family Feud, Match Game, $100,000 Pyramid, Card Sharks, Press Your Luck. They just announced a reboot of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Supermarket Sweep, hosted by Leslie Jones. Yes, that show is coming back. ABC has gone all in on the genre, and they have been rewarded handsomely for it. People really cared about this greatest of all time tournament, and that was just phenomenal to see. I am a game show super fan, have been since I was a child. I've talked about this many times on the podcast before. My dream job growing up was to be the host of Family Feud. That dream has not changed, although it has become less likely, I would say, over time. But to see game shows be the center of water cooler conversation, and this was the case when James Holzhauer went on that run last year, was just super special. And when I heard about this tournament, I was hoping that it would look something like this, and it certainly did. I think everyone wanted it to go 7 games. I think everyone wished that Brad Rutter in the 3rd spot would have put up a little more of a fight. He did not. It was unfortunate to see, and Ken Jennings, in a hard-fought battle with James Holzhauer, wins the series 3-1. Funny enough, going into the series, I didn't really know what to expect. I almost put some money down in Vegas, and I decided not to. Ken would have been my 3rd guess to win this thing, and I know that sounds strange because the guy had a 74-game winning streak 15 years ago and was like the first Jeopardy celebrity contestant, and everyone just assumes he's the best player. But like Brad beat him 3 times over. Brad returned for 3 series, as did Ken after their initial runs, and Brad won every single time. Brad has never lost to a human contestant on Jeopardy before. He only lost to IBM's Watson, the supercomputer. So, like, I thought going into it, James was probably the favorite because he was the youngest. We had not seen him compete against these guys before, but he looked like this insurmountable machine of a player. And, you just assume if LeBron James plays Michael Jordan, LeBron is going to win because it's, I don't know, recency bias. Athletes get better over time. Babe Ruth, more likely than not, would not be able to compete in today's MLB, right? So you just assume these guys are 10, 15 years older. They're a little slower than they once were. So, yeah, I think Ken would have probably been my 3rd guess. Brad, I would have... I don't know if I would have picked him, but I would have called him an underdog or a live dog, I should say. Had some sleeper potential. But Ken just unleashed this dominant performance this week. From the buzzer to the daily doubles to the betting strategy to the final Jeopardy round. Every facet of the game was perfect. And he needed to be perfect in order to beat James, who was hot on his tail and even last night made it interesting till the final moment. I've not only never seen that out of Ken Jennings before, but I've never seen that out of any contestant on Jeopardy before. It was true dominance in every phase of the game. And I just want to see this tournament 100 times over. I can't help but feel unsatisfied. I wanted to see more of a challenge. I wanted to see these guys continue to play. Not Brad. I could have done without Brad. But he just dug deep to this other level. And you could tell he was more prepared than the other 2 guys were. He had practiced the buzzer strategy more. His timing was impeccable. He rang in often much earlier than the other 2 contestants, and that gave him the slight edge when it came to finding those daily doubles. Obviously, James has a similar wealth of information and knowledge, but Ken has the little things. He has the intangibles, as it were. And it was just awesome television. That episode of Jeopardy last night was not only the best episode of Jeopardy I've ever watched, but it's the best episode of any game show I've ever watched in my life. It was true drama through and through. Ken goes all in on the first final Jeopardy round, doubles his score, goes up 15 grand. Actually, no, goes up 30 grand on James, which means James needed to be up an additional 15 grand going into the next Final Jeopardy round in order to close the gap. Ken finds the first daily double. Ken finds the second daily double. And James, out of nowhere, just bulldozes through the clues, amasses $20,000, finds the final daily double, and in this stressful moment, like one of the most anxiety-inducing moments I've ever seen in any sport, gets the question right. What is Chad? That moment is just going to live on in my head forever. Obviously, he's not able to seal the deal, gets the final Jeopardy question wrong. A question about Shakespeare, ironically enough, when James ended his run on his initial episodes on Jeopardy, he lost to Emma Betcher on a Shakespeare question. So such fitting poetry to cap off James's run this time. I think Ken said in some post-game interviews and on Twitter that James is such a dominant Jeopardy player that when him and Brad returned to the show, they had to adopt his strategy in order to beat him. And, you know, in many ways that is true. I think Ken proved that he's a slightly better player, and I think he proved that he's more naturally gifted, and there's a reason why he won 74 games in a row, and James couldn't quite get to 30. But there is something to be said for James making his competitors better players themselves. The great ones are able to elevate the competition. The great ones change the game, and their impact and their legacy is felt whether or not they're playing. The game's never going to be the same, and it's so exciting. And it's even more exciting to see Jeopardy talked about in this way, like a sport, like a genuine competition, because it is at this point. Right? Jeopardy is more popular now, 37 years into its run, than it's ever been. I don't know how that's possible with changing television viewing habits, with streaming media replacing network television. Somehow this syndicated daytime game show is a dominant cultural force that somehow beats the World Series and the NBA Finals in the ratings. I cannot explain it, but I'm so happy. I am so satisfied with what the show has become. You know, oftentimes game shows like, I don't know, Deal or No Deal, The Price is Right, all shows that I love to watch, tend to put the glitz and the glamour ahead of the game. I mean, that is the nature of game shows. They are shot on sound stages. There are a lot of flashing lights. There are a lot of buttons that make funny sounds. The floors often illuminate. You sometimes put the superficial before the machinations of the game. And Jeopardy over the years has trusted its audience, has trusted the viewership in the way that something like Wheel of Fortune has not, to understand the game, to not talk down to the viewer, to not make the questions purposely easy so the audience can play along. Ken, Brad, James have clearly studied this game intently, and most Jeopardy contestants at this point have studied the game intently, so they know how much to bet going into Final Jeopardy, where you should search for the daily double clues, how much you should bet if you're up by a certain dollar amount. That's awesome. Let this be a lesson to other television creators. You win when you trust your product, and you win when you trust the audience to keep up. Jeopardy. No sign of slowing down soon.